Hey there! In this video we're going to explore how you can work twice as fast in Grasshopper by using clever shortcuts and tricks. Now, whether you're just starting out in Grasshopper or already working with complex definitions, I believe these tips will help you speed up your workflow, keep your canvas clean and avoid repetitive clicks. By the end of this, you'll be navigating Grasshopper with more confidence, organizing your definitions in a clean and clear manner, and spending less time hunting through menus. Let's get started. So I've set up a definition for you guys to follow along with all the shortcuts that I found useful, the Grasshopper shortcuts cheat sheet. And I've included also, just to make sure, a key legend to indicate what I mean. If I type in LMB, for instance, it means left mouse button click, etc. So the way it works is basically on the left, I have my mouse or keyboard combination, and then on the right, what's going to happen. And I've divided them more or less in three areas. First, general, which are combinations that work almost always. You can use like in a generic sense. Then we have canvas shortcuts that have to do with your Grasshopper definition, the Grasshopper canvas, and how to affect basically the whole definition all at once. And then we have component-specific combinations, which means interacting with a component, right-clicking on it, middle mouse clicking on it, things like that, or interacting with the input grips, the inputs or outputs. And then I have a small definition here on the right for you guys to test out all these shortcuts. So let's first take a look at the general shortcuts. And the first one that I always found really helpful is bringing up the wheel menu. And that's done by hitting your middle mouse button. Just click it once and you see the radial wheel menu open. And I've always find it helpful if you select a bunch of components, you want to turn them off, the preview middle mouse, and just disable preview or enable them, or you can even disable and enable their function so they just stop working. Another one that I use also frequently is the search menu. Instead of looking up a component in the ribbons, you can just double click on the canvas, just type in a component you want, if you want the list item component. The nice thing is that Grasshopper autocomplete, so you don't have to remember the exact name, just, it was more or less this, and it will autocomplete, and you can find it in the list itself. Another way to bring open the search menu, just hitting your spacebar, that's another way to open that menu. If you want to bring up the canvas menu, just right-click on an empty area of your canvas, not on top of a component. Those are all shortcuts we're going to take a look in a while. Just on an empty area, right-click, and you have some other options as well. Some of them are similar to the wheel menu. So that's another way to kind of interact with components, with your canvas, etc. And another one that is very helpful is making some space on your canvas using the Alt plus left mouse button and then drag your left mouse button. So that's very helpful, let's say, if you want to create some space in your definitions, right? So if you go to our test definition, let's say here, after this part, for instance, you want to create some space. So what you'd used to do is, well, I'd have to select all of this stuff, and just drag it manually, just like this, and then, do your thing. But a quicker way is to hold your Alt and then drag with your left mouse, and you see that you create some space horizontally. Now I've released my Alt button, but if I tap my Alt button once more, it switches to vertical. My left mouse is pressed down. I'm just tapping the Alt button to kind of change the direction. So this one takes a little bit of use to, because first hold Alt, then drag and then release your Alt, but having your left mouse button still pressed, and then you can tap Alt to, change direction. This is a quick way to kind of, create some space instead of, zooming out, dragging your components, etc. Then we have some display settings, basically. So either disabling the preview, going to wireframe, or set it to shaded, which are those three buttons here on the top, 1, 2, and 3. So instead of, clicking them, Control 1, Control 2, and Control 3 affect those. And if we go to my Rhino viewport, this is the result of that definition. It's all the way here. It's just some pyramids that I created. It's just for testing out this thing. But let's say if I want to, instead of set it to shaded, I could press Control 2 and it will switch to wireframe. You say, well, I want to turn everything off, Control 1. And these three functions, they affect the whole definition. Not just, for instance, this component is turned on, but because I have this one set to don't draw any preview geometry, it will override it basically. And the default is set to Control 3. Now, some of you find it helpful just to draw the preview geometry for a component that I select. Unfortunately, there's no shortcut for that one set, so you have to set it yourself. I think it's this button here, only draw preview geometry for selected objects, which is also very helpful because most of the time you just want to preview one component to not have any confusion in your Rhino viewport, like more clarity. So this way you just select what you want to display and it will be displayed. So for instance, these are the, the B-reps, the surfaces. These are like the individual surfaces that I base my definition on, etc. And if I select more, all of them will be displayed. So if you want to create a shortcut to, toggle this option on and off, you can go to File and then Preferences. And if you go to Interface and scroll down a little bit, here are all the shortcuts. Well, most of the shortcuts we're going to go over, they're also located here. If you scroll down a little bit, they're here. So here we see Control 1, 2, and 3, which are the ones we just went over. And then this one, selected only preview. That's the one you want to set. So I've set it to Control 4. For you guys, there's not going to be anything. Now to change it, just select it with your mouse, just click it once, then press your combination you want. So that will be, for instance, Control 4. And when you're done, just hit Enter and it will be set. So now if I type in Control 4, you see that I can toggle that option on and off. So those were the general components. Now let's take a look at some canvas shortcuts. And those have to do with the whole definition basically. So let's say if you want to switch between definitions, what you'd usually do is go to the right top, open this thing up. If you have multiple definitions open, you can select here, you can select one. Another way to do this is hold your control and just tap your tab key. And you see that this window will open, and by tapping your tab key, you can switch between definitions like this. So it's a shortcut to do that. If you press Ctrl W, it will close the definition. Don't worry, it will first ask you like, hey, do you want to save it? So it doesn't just shut down immediately instead of going to File, Close. And another one, if you want to start a new definition, instead of going to File, New, you can just type in Ctrl N and a new definition opened, right? Now, another way to open a definition is instead of going to File, Open, you can also drag a definition in Grasshopper. Let me show you. So you have some definitions. Let's say I want to, open this definition. I could just, click and drag and drop it here and it will open just like this, right? But let's say I want to insert this definition directly in this definition, like as an import or insert option. That's another way that you can do. If you click and drag, for instance, this definition, and you go to the left corner, you see it peeling open, like right here. And if you hover over with your mouse, you see some options here appear. And the default is open, which is the one we just shown. But let's say if I just want to insert it on top of this definition, like inside, you can hover over this one, insert files, and release your left mouse. And you see that the definition got just inserted here. So that's pretty cool. And if you want to insert it as a group, that's also possible. So again, here, go here, and then hover over here, group files. You can even insert it as a cluster as well. But let's say group files, and you see that it's inserted as a group. Now, a lot of times we want to insert a panel with some text, with some comments, things like that. And a quick way to already add a panel with text inside is to open your search window. So either double click or spacebar, put 2 forward slashes, and then you see panel being added. And now if you type some text and hit enter, you see that a panel is added plus the text already inside. And the panel is also nicely scaled around that text. So that's a quick way to add some text, add some numbers using the panel component without having to manually first add a panel and then open a panel, add text, etc. Another thing we use a lot are sliders, number sliders. And the default, as you might know, is if I insert a number slider, its default is always set between 0 and 1, 3 decimal places, and the default value at 0.25. But let's say I want to add a slider from 0 to 4, and the default set at 3, like the example. So the way to do that is, for instance, like this. If I do 0 to 4 just like this, it will automatically recognize like, hey, you're not putting any decimal places, so I'm gonna switch it automatically to integers. So now I have a slider from 0 to 1 or 0 to 4 using integers. If I want to use decimal places, instead of typing 4, I would type 4.000, depending on how many decimal places I want. So 3 decimal places, just like this. And you see that now I have a number slider with 3 decimal places between 0 and 4. And if I want to create a slider with a default value set, I would put, for instance, 0, and then let's say I want to put my default value at 2.5, and then 4.000 for the decimal places, and that's how you do it. So that's a quick way to add a number slider already with the settings you want included. And the same for arithmetic components like multiplication, addition. If you already want to include a value for the B input, because its default, I think, is set to 0 or none, you can just add, if I say plus, for instance, plus 6, and enter, you see that my B input is by default set to 6. So that's a quick way to insert these components with a default value set. And this works as well for like multiplication, division, all the arithmetic ones. And the same for larger than or smaller than. If you want to, you can use like the left facing arrow and the right facing arrow, like the smaller than, like this, or larger than would be this one. Let's take a look at the component specific shortcuts and combinations. The first one is if you drag a component and you hold your shift key, it will snap orthogonally. So that's way, if you try it out with the definition here, this way you can move components like orthogonally, so your definition stays clean. Another thing is that, let's say you have a component like this, but you want to line it up with this component here. If you just move it without holding your shift, you see that at some point it snaps. So that's another way to keep your definition clean. Like look for those snap points, or in another case, just hold your shift to move them orthogonally. The next one is just opening the object context menu for a component. So just on the middle of the component, just right click and you get some certain options. Another one is if you right click on an input, you get a different type of context window, the same for the output. So be mindful of that. Depending on where you right click, where you want to open the context window, you get a different context window. And another thing we usually do a lot is copy and pasting components, like copying components. And what I used to do is just select a component and your standard Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V, right? The problem with this is that it always pastes the component like half on top of the previous one. So you would have to, drag it somewhere else, right? Now, if you want to do that in one go, you would select a component and just drag it with your left mouse. And then if you tap your Alt key just once, you see that you create a copy directly. So that's very helpful, right? And the nice thing is, let's say if I do it for this one, the connection with the previous component or all the wires that are connected to it, they continue with the copy as well. So using your Alt key, I'm trying to get used to a little bit, but it's way quicker. If you just select a component and just tap your Alt, like copying it like that, it's pretty quick. Yet another way to copy and paste components is if you, let's say you select a set of components, if you Ctrl+C to copy them to the clipboard, let's say I want to paste this set of components somewhere here. The way to always paste it in the middle of your Grasshopper canvas is to, instead of Ctrl+V for paste, type in Ctrl+Shift+V. So Ctrl+Shift+V, and that way it will always be pasted in the middle of your canvas, no matter where you're looking at. Just like that. The next thing we're going to take a look at is if you want to insert components on the canvas, what you would usually do is either use the search window this way to find a component and insert it, or go to your ribbons and, go to the tab. You want to look for your component, let's say a surface component, and then find it somewhere here, click it, and then insert it, right? But most of the time, we have a set of components that we want to insert because we want to create a certain part of a definition and we need a set of components for that. So a quick way to insert a set of components in aggregate, like directly, is hold your shift key and then just start selecting components. So I can select, for instance, this one, I can select this one, I can select this one, and for instance, this one and that one. I'm just selecting, a couple of random components. Now release your shift on the canvas. Just here you can start placing all those components in aggregate, right? And that's a quick way. If you want to insert a set of components quickly, this is the way to go. And a lot of times, if you don't know where a component is located, that doesn't apply for components that come with default with Grasshopper. Like most of the time, you're able to find them. But let's say you don't know exactly where a component is located. For instance, this one. If you hold your Control and Alt key, you see the mouse changing into a information icon. And if you then select a component, you see that it will display it where it's located on the ribbon, right? And this works for all the components that are located on your Grasshopper canvas, right? So this one is located in the transform and then Euclidean, right? This one's located on the curve and under analysis. Now, this is especially useful if you have a lot of plugins installed and you get a definition from someone and you see a component that's not familiar to you. This way you can quickly locate, oh, it's part of this plugin. It's located here. It does this, things like that. Now, for the input context window, there's some other shortcuts that we can use. So remember, like if you right click on the input or output of a component, for instance, here we get this context window. Now, a lot of times we want to flatten the input or graph the input or simplify. Those are, as you can see here, they're already available here because those are operations we usually use a lot. So instead of like selecting it, for instance, flatten, what you also could do is just right click and hit your F key for flatten, and it will also work. Same for simplify, which here doesn't work because there's no input, but if I use it here, you see the simplify appear. And the same for graph, which is the G. So it's the first letter of the word. And the same for extract parameter, which I think is E. So this way it will extract the parameter. And for the component itself, so it doesn't matter if you do it on the output or on the middle of the component, there's the bake option, right? And I know if you want to just bake a component, what you also could do is hit your insert key. If you hit your insert key, it will bake it directly to Rhino. The problem is that depending on what layer you have active in Rhino, that will be the layer it will be baked to. It doesn't give you the option to choose a layer or other options. And that is with this shortcut, it will actually allow you to do that. So that's very nice. The shortcut is if you right click and then hit the B key for bake. And here you see that a window will open up and you can give it some attributes. So you can choose which layer you want to bake it to, the display mode and some other stuff if you want to group it. So let's say I want to bake it to layer 3. I hit OK and it will bake my planes to layer 3. Now, another way to turning on and off the preview or enabling or disabling a component, like what we've seen, we could use the general Control 1, 2, and 3. But another way to, turn individual components on or off, which you have a bit more granular control, is to use the Control Q. Let me go to my Rhino. So let's say I want to turn these components on. For instance, I would select them all. And if I type in Control Q, it will toggle their display mode. So right now, this one was already turned on. It was turned off, and the other one vice versa. So again, if I just select one and hit Control Q, they will be turned on, right? So this is a really quick way. Instead of what I used to do is select all of them that I want to turn off or on, then middle mouse to bring up the wheel menu, and then select disable preview. But this is actually quicker. I would just select it, Control Q, and turn them on or off. And the same for if you want to disable or enable component, right? So you would just select the ones you want to disable or enable, and then hit Control E for enable, right? and Ctrl E again for enabling again. And the last one that's also very helpful is just grouping. And grouping is very helpful if you want to give some comments to a certain set of components that do a certain thing. Let's say, this part would divide the input surface into a set of segments. So I could, Ctrl G to group them. And then I could right click on the group and give it a name. So it would be, for instance, segmenting base surface or something like that. Now, let's take a look at the component grips and wires, there's also some shortcuts for that, because connecting wires and disconnecting wires sometimes is a bit of a hassle. So let me go here. For instance, there's a lot of wires and things going on. So you're probably familiar with, if I want to connect multiple wires to an input. So let me just disconnect all these guys. Or better, let me just copy this component. So drag it, tap Alt to make a copy, and right click, and let me disconnect all the inputs so we start fresh. So just connecting it's just dragging and dropping to connect the wire. Now, if you want to connect another one in the same input, the other one gets disconnected. If you want to connect multiple, you'll hold your Shift key, and this way you can connect multiple wires. If you want to disconnect them, if you hold your Control key, just trace your wire again, and it will be disconnected, right? Another one that's very helpful is if you want to move all the inputs all at once to another input. So let's say I have my point component here, and I want to move all these outputs basically all at once to this one. So before you'd have to, manually do all of that. But if you hold your Control and Shift together, you see that also my mouse changed in this icon. And now if I drag with my left mouse, I disconnect them all at once and connect them all at once to my new point. So that's very helpful to disconnect and reconnect a set of wires instead of doing it one by one. This is just if you want to connect wires really quick. So let's say I am connecting a wire here. So the moment if I just click and drag with my left mouse, I'm out of the wire command. So I'd have to go back here, go here and connect it again, connect it again. There's a quicker way to do that. So if you hold your left mouse and drag, and then instead of releasing your left mouse, just tap your right mouse. If I tap my right mouse, like a connection was created. The nice thing is I'm still my wire mode. So I can just, tap my right mouse, tap my right mouse, tap my right mouse to quickly connect wires that way. This is more of an organizational shortcut or trick, is if you double click on a wire, you can create a relay. And relays are nice because you can kind of avoid clutter of wires in your definition. For instance, you could add a wire to this relay just like this. And that way you can kind of create clutter. I don't use it that much, but sometimes it's pretty useful, especially in these kind of situations where you have a lot of wires going to one point and things like that. Like a relay might be helpful. And the last thing that's also helpful is, so let's say these points, I want to change the name of the output to something that, let's say this is an important output, and I want to kind of emphasize hey, this is something that must be paying attention to, like a milestone in my definition kind of. So I could put I don't know, main points for construction or something like that. If I want to copy that name to another input, I would have to, connect it and then manually change the geometry to have the same name here. But if I drag and I tap my Alt key, you see that the wire turns red. And if I now release it to my geometry input, you see that the name gets transferred as well. So that's a quick way, if you use Grasshopper like that, renaming outputs and inputs for clarity. This way you can quickly transfer that name between output and inputs without having to do it manually. So that's very nice as well. And finally, we'll look at some best practices I found over the years for keeping your Grasshopper definitions readable and clean. So I'm going to talk a little bit about grouping, commenting, organizing by rows, and setting milestones in your workflow. Let's take a look at our test definition here. And the first thing that's always very helpful is, if you can, internalize your data in a component, your start component, your parameter where most of your definitions are going to work off your reference geometry. In our test definition, it's a surface. That's this one. So let me minimize it. Let me turn off some stuff. So right now I generated that surface as a plane in Grasshopper itself. Let me just disconnect this one. So this one doesn't have any values right now. And let's say you want to reference a custom surface in Rhino, something like this. Select it, right click and set one surface. The thing is that if you open this definition in another file or someone else opens this definition, it will turn orange because it can't find this surface. You need to have the accompanying Rhino file as well. And sometimes it gets a bit mixed up. So what you can do if you want to, save that geometry in the Grasshopper definition itself is right click on the component after you've referenced the geometry in on the parameter and then right click and select internalize data. And this way, right now this surface is saved internally in the parameter component. So I can delete this one and the definition doesn't break. So that's a very nice way if you want to share definitions with colleagues and stuff to not have, a Rhino file and a Grasshopper file. It's kind of a hassle. There's always, things that go wrong. This way it's more direct. So you just share the Grasshopper definition and it just works. They don't have to worry about locating the geometry in Rhino, things like that, right? So let me clear it and let me just use my plane again. So another thing to keep your definitions clean and readable is using grouping and scribble. So grouping is just what I usually do is select parts of my definition that do a certain thing. For instance, here we have a plane that's being divided into segments, resulting in some set of segmented surfaces. So I would, select this whole thing and hit Ctrl G to group them and just give it a name. So here will be segmenting base surface. So whenever I open the definition up again, I know, oh wait, this part of my definition, does this thing, right? And another thing, if you just want to add some text or whatever, you can use the scribble. It's called scribble and it's just a piece of text. Basically all these things, they're scribbles too. It's just a set of text. And you can just put some text like, hey, you can change the font and the size. It's another way to just add some comments, things like that. You could also draw on the canvas using this one, create some sketch objects. So here, for instance, you could draw an arrow like, hey, I'm referring to this group, all these things, right? Another thing to keep your definition clean is to use the grid. And the grid is very helpful because it allows you to kind of align your components so the wires, they look clean. It's just like a reference guide, basically. So use the grid as much you can to kind of create clean definitions. And what I shown previously, I think, is if you move a component like this, you see it also snaps when the wire is like straight. So that's another way to keep your definition clean. Another way to kind of order your components or align them in a better way is if you select multiple components, for instance, these guys, is to look at these handles on the sides. And for instance, if I hit this one, I think, yeah, they're spaced out vertically, right? So if let's say I move this one here, whatever, and I do it again, you see that they get nicely spaced out along their vertical axis. And let's say I want to also align them because let's say, this one's maybe a little bit here, this one's maybe a little bit here. So first I would line them like this. And then I think if I hit this one, their center gets nicely aligned, right? So that's another way to kind of quickly order your components and keep your definition clean. Now, what I like to do is I like to move row by row. So I first start with parts of my definition. So like breaking it down. Okay, this thing does this thing does this. And then whenever I get to a milestone component or a milestone geometry, for instance, this one, where like this one, I usually just put a parameter component next to it. So in this case, it's a surface. And then I would rename this one segmented surfaces. Then I would continue with the next part of my definition. So here, like this thing, what it would do is create the pyramids, I think. I could even break this down into smaller parts, but it's not that much. So we can just leave it like this. And here I would say, creating pyramids from base segmented surfaces. Of course, you can name it however you want, whatever makes sense to you, right? And then again, here I join them together in a B-rep. And then here, I can name this one, for instance, final pyramid or something like that. Working this way is very helpful because it allows you to directly recognize in your definition per group, like the smaller pieces your definition consists of, and also know directly, hey, what does it do? And also it allows you, if you want to create options, for instance, which I did here below, is to like, hey, oh, my segment surfaces, no? I want to, instead of creating pyramids on top of these guys, let's try something else. So what I usually do is create a row like below it in the same vertical position, and also name these guys the same. So let me just so I get this one, and let me just reconnect them. This one goes here, and this one goes here, and delete this one. So this way I know, like, hey, this is option 1, this is option 2. You could even name it, for instance, like here, you could put a scribble here with like option 1 and do the same here in the bottom, right? So Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V, and just drag this down and call this guy option 2. And this way it's very, very clear, very readable, even if other people, open your definition that want to do something with it. So here what I did is with some attractors, let me just put some points so you know what's happening. Like right click and set multiple geometry. So it just creates a tessellation based on those attractor inputs, right? So there will be option 2, and then I don't know, maybe the next one you want to do something else. And this definition isn't that big, but if you, of course, if you want to build on top of this guy and, at some point your definition gets really stretched, like you can go all the way until here, with, with components. So that's also not very helpful. So what I usually do after reaching like a milestone like this guy, I'd like to start on a new line. So I would create a copy of this thing, connect it, and then set this wire to hidden, and then just drag this on a new line somewhere here. So at the same height, more or less, as where you start. And then from here, you can create your definition. So here, all this space, you can again try out stuff. Keep your options a little bit more close. So like, hey, this is not a new option. It's actually, a continuation for option 1, for instance, no? Or, you want to use this one, you can also connect it here and continue with option 2, for instance. So that's a quick way to keep your definition readable, work with options, and making it clear for everyone if they want to work and continue with it. Also for you, if you open it after a long time, trust me, if you set it up like this, it will be very clear. So in this exercise, we've covered a bunch of handy shortcuts and easy tricks that will help you move faster and more comfortable around Grasshopper. You've learned how to quickly search for components, connect and disconnect wires effortlessly, manage your canvas smoothly, and keep your definitions tidy and clear. These shortcuts are great because they save you time, keep your workspace organized, enable you to collaborate more efficiently, and help you focus on designing rather than clicking around. If you've enjoyed this and you want to dive a little bit deeper, you should definitely check out our platform Think Parametric. We offer an extensive library of courses taught by industry experts, including our Grasshopper certification course, where we take you from being a complete beginner all the way to advanced use. This video only scratched the surface. Come explore the full potential of Grasshopper and boost your skills even further on our platform Think Parametric. See you there.